Judaism is built upon optimism. Judaism is built upon the future. Judaism is built upon resilient determination. It's not built upon victimhood, and it's not built upon seeing ourselves as victims. It's understanding that we have to plant, this was one of my grandfather's favorite sayings, we have to plant a tree under which's shade we will never sit. We have to do things for the future, for future generations.
Today's guest on Jew and Stew is Yuval David, an Emmy Award-winning journalist, actor, and filmmaker who has won over 100 international film festival awards. He's a leading advocate for the Jewish people, focusing on Israeli and American values, and he has worked as an advisor and communication strategist for civil rights, social justice, and human rights causes, focusing on Jewish and LGBT rights. Yuval advises international NGOs, policy institutes, and advocacy organizations, bringing expertise in media, communications, and socio-political analysis. He is a news contributor, with his commentary appearing on major global news networks and international publications. A frequent keynote speaker at policy forums, conferences, synagogues, churches, and universities, Yuval is recognized for his clear, bold, and courageous insights on complex issues. Yuval has blended his work in entertainment, media, and government affairs towards exacting and compelling storytelling and strategic communications.
Yuval, thank you so much for joining us on Jew and Stew today. Simona and I are thrilled. I think the inception for this was that you and Simona, you guys met in New York at a summit. You guys want to say how you guys met and how this all came to be?
Yeah, I've been so excited for this. I just felt like when we met in New York, like you and I just clicked, like there was such wonderful synergy with us. I wouldn't say it was a summit. It was a think tank. It was a Global Peace for Israel think tank. And we've been continuing to be part of the think tank, and they're doing wonderful work in bringing grassroots organizations like ours together. But yeah.
Yuval, give us a little bit of a background of you as a young kid and what your Jewish identity might have meant to you. And maybe like, was it something that your parents introduced to you, grandparents? What was your first sense of, I'm a Jew and this is who I am, this is my identity? Can you maybe paint that picture for us?
Born and raised in the United States, spending summers and winters in Israel, being a first-generation American, a child of immigrants who were children of immigrants, and recognizing that I was raised and born into a family of heroes, of recognized heroes. My grandparents on my mom's side being Holocaust survivors whose documented heroism is within Holocaust museums around the world. And when I was a child, they couldn't step a few steps in public in Israel without somebody stopping them in the street and thanking them for saving their lives, or speaking to me and reminding me who my grandparents are, or asking me if I really know who my grandparents are. That was something that was very monumental for me as a child, to recognize that I'm the grandchild of heroes. And on my father's side, my grandmother fled Poland as a little girl with all of her older siblings to Israel right before the borders closed. And her parents went back to finish some last-minute affairs before getting back to the British mandate at the time, and disappeared into the Nazi war machine. But my grandfather was born and raised in Kfar Saba, a city that my family were of two families that created the city of Kfar Saba, which is right near Ra'anana, in Hebrew we say Vatikei Kfar Saba, the old families of Kfar Saba. My great grandparents were agricultural pioneers and created mango and clementine orchards in Israel. And my parents and their stories of being born in Israel, fighting for the survival of our people and going through all of the incredible stories that they have. I was raised with all of that, but I also had the benefit as an American Jew, born and raised in the United States, to have gone to a Jewish day school from K through 12. And that is something that added and solidified my Jewish identity. And I think that that's actually one of the big problems within the American Jewish community, is that too many American Jews, and we'll get into this later, too many American Jews do not have a Jewish education, do not know what Judaism is about, what the Jewish people are about. So I recognized that I was raised not just as a Jew in America, and not just as a dual citizen of Israel and the United States, and not just as an Israeli in America, and not just as a Zionist in this world. I recognized how lucky I am to be alive, and that my life isn't my own. My life is of and for my family, my friends, my community, my nation, and my people. So activism was something that I started doing at a very young age because I understood that that's what every Jew needs to do.
I have two questions. So my grandma cannot talk about her experiences in the Holocaust. Like, it makes her physically ill. So when you were growing up, were your grandparents actually telling you these stories? Do you have a story you would like to share?
My grandparents
from
recognized that life isn't unicorns and rainbows, but you can see life that way. They didn't hide the complexities and the hardships and the challenges and the horrors of life and what they went through from me, my brother, or the rest of my cousins, the rest of their grandkids. We understood that they were not just heroes, but they were also survivors, and that the vast majority of their family and friends were all murdered in horrendous ways. So yeah, I was raised with those stories. My grandfather, Yosef, his name, or Józek, as he was called in Poland, was from Wadowice, Poland, not far from Krakow. His childhood friend actually was a Catholic Polish kid who ended up becoming Pope John Paul II. And it's an incredible story of their friendship and their family's friendship that ultimately led to Pope John Paul changing the Catholic Church decree blaming Jews for deicide. He was the Pope that changed the Catholic Church policy based on living with a Jewish family as a child and having a best friend who was Jewish.
I have like goosebumps. Like, I'm literally like my hair on my arms are standing up. Like, that's.
I
Do you have photos
yeah,
of them together?
And there.
Oh my goodness, you're gonna have to send us one.
My grandfather came from an ultra Orthodox Jewish family, but he kept getting beaten up in the streets and having to fight against Polish kids that were targeting him for being a Jew. And one day he decided to cut off one of his payas and lied to his parents, saying that the bullies did it, but they knew that he was lying and they were very upset at him. And they ended up sending him off to live with a childless aunt and uncle in not far from Prague, in then Czechoslovakia. And they were well-known jewelers, and that's how my grandfather learned a skilled trade, learned how to not just create jewelry and be a watchsmith, but those skills that he learned as a child and then brought back home as he moved back to Poland and with his family, who were also jewelers. That's a skill that ended up saving him during the Holocaust. He was one of the first Jews to be taken into the camps in Poland. They wanted to take his father, my grandfather's father, but my grandfather went in his father's stead and lied about his identity at first, going in instead of his father. And he was in the camps from 1939 to 1945 and survived 9 camps and death marches as well. And one of the things that he understood is that he always needed to be useful. So he wasn't only known, at first his name was Yosef, but once he was in the camps, he was A5670. And the nickname that he ended up getting from the SS and the SA was der Kunstmacher, the magic man. And in Judaism, there's a name for somebody who has golden hands, who can create and do things. And the Jews in the camps referred to him as having golden hands, because anytime the Nazis said, we need a Jew who does carpentry, we need a Jew who knows how to weld, we need a Jew who knows whatever type of skilled trade, my grandfather always raised his hand and said that he could do it, even if he didn't know how to do it. And with his brilliance, he always made sure that there was something wrong that only he knew about, so they would never kill him off after he was done with whatever task. And it led him, as he said, to see to survive, but it also led him to see some of the most horrible things, because he was very much put into different situations where he saw horrendous things, and that toughened him, but also further developed his street smarts and his survivalism. And he also tried to bribe the capos and the SS in the camps. And how does a Jew in a camp who has nothing other than the clothes on his back bribe them? And he said, well, let me know if you have a girlfriend, if you have a wife, I can create shoes for you. I can create, I can carve into jewelry for you and carve her name or do something special. And again, like when he would create watches for some of them, he made sure that there was something wrong, that they would have to go to him in order to fix their watch. And it's a long story, but he also ended up meeting my grandmother in the camps. She was amongst a first group of women brought into Otmut, which was a slave labor camp. They were very involved in creating the Autobahn, which everybody speaks about, this amazing road that the Nazis built that was supposed to cut across all of Europe. Well, the Jews built that. The Jewish slave labor built the Autobahn, including many Jews who were pushed into the rock destruction machines to pave the roads. The roads were not just paved with stone, they were also paved with Jews who were kicked into the machines by the SS. And my grandmother, she came also from an Orthodox family, not as Orthodox, but a smaller family. My grandfather was one of 12 children, and he was the second youngest. My grandmother had one brother, Duvce, who she always said that I very much looked like. And my grandmother would keep a photo next to her bed of a photo of me and a photo of her brother, the one photo that she was able to find after the war. And she put our photos next to each other on a frame. And we truly, we looked so similar. She was taken into the camps and was this gorgeous young teenager who was wearing her father's shoes, because when the SS came to take them into the trains, that was the first pair of shoes she saw. So she was wearing shoes that didn't fit her. She was wearing, an oversized coat. And when she was brought into Otmut, this camp, it's when the Nazis decided that they needed women in the camp to do women's work, which meant peeling potatoes, which meant making the soup, which meant cleaning different areas. And my grandfather, in the weeks prior, when the Nazis at the camp asked if somebody knows how to do carpentry, he raised his hand and he was assigned to build the roof of the woman's bunk, which really was like a barn, or a shack, I should say. And that's when he first saw her. And he said he'd never seen a more beautiful woman in his life. It also was the first time he saw a healthy Jew in more than a year. And it was the first time he saw a woman in more than a year. So she checked all these boxes, being a healthy Jew, being a woman, and being stunningly beautiful. And he said that she looked like a little bird. And they ended up communicating through the roof of the bunk because he was still fixing it. And she found a piece of paper and a little piece of a pencil, and they would write love notes to each other on the same paper and throw it to each other through the roof, or when they would pass by the electric fence on different sides of the fence, they would pass the note to each other, hide it in specific places. And this little paper ended up getting completely filled with their notes to each other or their notes of hopefulness. And that's how their love ended up developing. They fell in love without ever touching each other. And that love gave them such hope to survive. And they promised each other that they would survive this, against all odds and against the horrible things that they were already seeing and they'd already survived. And it was that love, it was that hope that helped them survive really horrendous things that ended up happening to them later on, while they were still in the camps. My grandmother survived terrible things that, maybe that would be a future podcast episode or discussion.
I think there's a couple of unique things in that story. First of all, I always get so amazed by the optimism. You started that whole story about your grandparents saying that they maintained their optimism. Was it through this love, or I always say this anecdote. My grandparents on my mother's side were partisans fighters, and they lived through hell, and they also found each other in the forest and fell in love in hell, like eating squirrels, and fighting the Nazis. And what's so unique is about that generation is when I asked my grandma, how did you keep optimism through hell? How are you still optimistic? How are you still a Jew today? She would say, what are you talking about? God gave us Israel after the war. God gave us the IDF. There's something about the resilience of the Jewish spirit that finds hope, that finds perseverance. And that's really just like when I hear these little anecdotal stories, it re-solidifies the strength of the Jewish people and what we're willing to do to survive. And we've been doing it for 3,000 years. We will find that little piece of paper and find love in hell. And it's a beautiful, beautiful notion. I think that it's a beautiful story.
Judaism is built upon optimism. Judaism is built upon the future. Judaism is built upon resilient determination. It's not built upon victimhood, and it's not built upon seeing ourselves as victims. It's understanding that we have to plant, this was one of my grandfather's favorite sayings, we have to plant a tree under which's shade we will never sit. We have to do things for the future, for future generations. And no matter what we go through, we must survive. We must help our people. And that's ultimately what Zionism is all about. Zionism, not just modern Zionism, as it was rebranded in the late 1800s, but Zionism as the movement that's been integral within the Jewish people for thousands of years. Focusing on our peoplehood, our indigeneity, on our homeland, and on survivalism.
I wonder if that's why we don't fit the archetypical instrument of, victimization from, let's say, like the oppressor-oppressee binary or the left. Like we really don't feel like victims. We really just, we want to be our own heroes. We want to find that piece of paper. We want to see Israel after the partisans, the foundation, the DNA of Judaism is to not be a victim. Then a victimization is, mobilizing, and that's like fermenting as like a political force. We can't be a part of that. Maybe that's why we were so shocked when we're saying, well, why don't we fit as a minority into the rest of the minorities that are mobilizing? Maybe that might be one of the reasons. It's just
well, we do fit, and we do say and do think that we fit, but it's the people who other us who say that we don't fit because they see Jews as successful. They absorb all of the old and ancient tropes about the Jewish people, controlling the media, controlling the government, controlling the banks, controlling the whatever it is, or even just really not understanding how we have survived. Because if you look at everything that's happened to the Jewish people throughout the course of history, it doesn't make sense that we're still here. Even though there are only 15.5 million Jews in the world, there really should have been billions of Jews in the world by now if it wasn't for us constantly being attacked and murdered and killed and oppressed and occupied. So that is what many of the people who focus on what a marginalized minority goes through. They say, well, it doesn't make sense that the Jews are still alive and that Jews are still able to to flourish, then that means that the Jews must be an enemy or there must be something wrong. So extremists fear the Jewish story because it proves that freedom, truth, and identity can endure any attempt to erase them or to erase us. Every generation of Jews has had to defend our people in some way. And it's our generation's responsibility now to ensure that we never normalize anti-Semitism online, on campus, or in the streets. It is our same job and responsibility to defend, protect, and fight forward for our people. Apparently, that's just, our goal, our lot in life.
I saw an interview you gave right after the shootings in DC. I think it was on Fox. And you talked about how we are, a minority and the amount of attacks against Jewish people is so high, but yet every time we bring up the fact that we're being attacked, we get told we complain about being attacked too much. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Who other than the Jews are expected to define the hatred against them? Or who other than the Jews have other people defining the hatred against them? When we say we are being attacked, and the facts are obvious, they're out there, people then try to diminish our victimhood and try to diminish the facts of our being targeted. And then they try to redefine the hatred against us from a place of hating us. What other people deal with that? What other people face that? The LGBTQIA2S plus movement hasn't faced that. Black people haven't faced that. Other indigenous people haven't faced that. Other religions and ethnicities haven't faced it the way the Jews have. So that means that we must be more vocal. We must be more active, not just with our words, but with our actions. That's why so many things in Judaism, not Judaism as a religion, but Judaism as a people, which includes Judaism as a religion, focus on doing things for ourselves, for our neighbors, whether they're Jewish or not, and for the planet. So we focus on fighting forward. We focus on building, on creating and recreating. And it really sucks. It's really horrible. But apparently Jews have had to deal with this for a long time. You look at oppression of Jews in Muslim countries throughout the course of Arab history. Jews have been second or third class citizens and have been oppressed, have been raped, and have been forcibly converted. Same thing within the Christian world. We saw that for, a couple thousand years of Christendom. And we saw that during the Roman Empire and the Ottoman Empire. And we saw that during the Greek Empire. And we saw that during the Assyrian and the Babylonian Empire. This keeps happening to us. And it sucks, but it's a reality.
I think that there's something, and maybe, I can only speak to like the Chicago Jewish community, but there's still this like, hey, don't point that out. Don't call that out. Don't do this. That's going to cause waves. Just keep your head down. Antisemitism
And do you know what?
exists,
And I disagree.
keep it down.
I'm cutting you off because I don't even want to hear you say it. And I know I'm being rude by cutting you off. What I have learned, especially not just in the last couple years since October 7th, 2023, and when the protests and rabid anti-Semitism spread like a pandemic of Jew hatred. But even before that, when for 20 years of being a very active and vocal Jewish activist, is, you know what? The harsh realization is not everybody's going to like us. We don't need to appease everybody. And we do have enemies. We should be able to call them out. I, for so long, was a people pleaser. Let me just make sure everybody's happy and sprinkle my Yuval pixie dust, as people would call it. And I'd entertain and uplift and inspire, which was a brand statement for everything I would do as an actor, as a journalist, as a filmmaker for so long. And then I said, you know what? No, I have a line in the sand. You cannot cross this. If you wrong my people, if you wrong my family, if you wrong my friends, you are my enemy and I will call you out for it. And especially since October 7th, really toughened me, also really aged me. Before we started recording, I said, I feel like I've aged like a bowl of fruit. It's been tough. And I've become a harder, harsher and much more intense person, but I stand behind it. Don't F with me. Don't F with my people. And if you do or say something wrong, there will be consequences. And I'm bold enough to be an advocate and an activist, not just with my words, but with my actions, and make sure that there are ramifications for hatred. I've done it for other people, and it's time that more Jews join us and do it for ourselves.
I'm going to get a little personal here. This is like probably more info than I've ever shared on this podcast. It's not just our enemies, like it's our friends, it's our extended family. We had an incident here not far from where I live where an Orthodox Jewish man was shot walking to shul Saturday morning in a very clear hate crime. Like the man screamed Allah Akbar and targeted him and shot him. And it took Chicago days and days and days, and a lot of public pressure to even call this a hate crime. But the minute it happened, I'm divorced. I'm remarried, but I'm divorced, and I have a child from my first marriage. And he's a Jewish child, and this was in our neighborhood. And I contacted his father, and every time there's anything happening, like my child was going to a Jewish day school when like things were being targeted, I would be like, hey, his father's not Jewish. So I would have to tell him like, hey, things are on high alert. Like you have a Jewish child, like please pay attention. So I told him about the shooting and he said, well, I heard the one Jewish alderman speak about it and she didn't say it was a hate crime. So I don't think this was targeted. And I'm like, how dare you? Like, I'm a Jew in the Jewish community, like telling you what is happening in the community and how the community feels right now. And you think you heard one Jew talk about it so you can dismiss like everything I'm saying. Like, it was, and that's what I get. Like, I've gone to the alderman, my alderman here, and have talked about why him reposting JVP on his like political profile page is problematic. And he's like, well, I talked to this Jewish person and they think that JVP's a majority in Jews and like there's no problem with it. And I'm like, you've got 5 Jews sitting here in your office right now telling you it's a problem and you're hiding behind the one Jew you knew who like, you're not Jewish. Like, why do you think it's okay to tell Jews how they feel about anti-Semitism and what Zionism means? And that's what we are being.
And how can they assume that one Jew represents all of the Jewish people, that one experience or 5 experience or however many it is represent an entire peoplehood? Do we expect every Muslim to be exactly the same? Do we expect every Christian person to be exactly the same, or every Buddhist person, or every Black person, or every LGBT person to be exactly the same? No, but people have this assumption that the Jewish people must all think something. And that's why when there are few Jews or people who pretend to be Jews who show up and speak out against the Jewish people or against Israel, they say, oh, you see, American Jews are against Zionism. It's like, no, that's not true. So JVP, for your whoever's tuning in and listening to this, Jewish Voices for Peace. Let me make something very clear. Jewish Voices for Peace is neither. It's neither a Jewish organization, nor is it for peace. JVP, Jewish Voices for Peace, is funded by Islamist organizations, including CARE, the Council of American Islamic Relations, and it has very few Jewish people who are part of JVP, but those Jewish people, or part Jewish people, or even not real Jewish people, are pushed to the front lines, and then all of the people behind them are non-Jewish. That way, they seem like they're much greater in numbers. It's the same thing that we see with Neturei Karta, this ultra-Orthodox sect of Jews who believe that Israel shouldn't exist because the Messiah hasn't arrived yet. So they are also funded by Islamist organizations to show up, and in their religious garb, all of a sudden people tokenize them and say, oh, you see, there are Jews who are against Zionism and Jews who are against Israel. Well, sure, speak about it with clarity, but don't make an assumption that all Jews are like this or that the majority of Jews are like this. This is the problem we are facing. There's a problem of the silent majority, which is seen across our political system in the West, which is also seen amongst the Jewish people. There are too many Jews who are afraid to speak up. And the loudest Jews are the ones who are representing our people. And that includes the very few, very, very small percentage of anti-Israel and anti-Zionist Jews who have created these large platforms for themselves.
I'm just thinking about this because it does seem like, the fermentation of anti-Semitism on the left has been prevalent. We've been fighting it for the last 2 years. Before we got live, I told you kind of the inception of Chicago Jewish Alliance was around some of the encampments. But something percolating lately that has been keeping me up as well is, like, for example, I know, Simona, you and I were talking about the Tucker, Nick Fuentes interview the other night about, kind of normalizing some of this anti-Semitism on the right. My question for you is, with the forces internationally, domestically, what keeps you up at night? Like, what do you find if we need to focus on the fight where we should be focused? Or is there no one battlefield? We do need to have the 6-Day War. And as Jews constantly, be acute to any anti-Semitism and take it out like white blood cells. Is there one faction of this that seems to be having more momentum that keeps you up at night, though?
There's a lot that keeps me up at night, and it's terrible, and it's very challenging. Through all of the things that I've gone through and survived throughout my life, near-death experiences, traumas, surviving terrorist acts, including many other things, I never had sleep issues like I do now and like I have since October 7th, because all of those other incidents started and ended. Right now, this is not ending. And I think that's what's causing the severe stress, anxiety, and depression that not only I'm feeling, but that a Jewish people as a whole are feeling. We're feeling the stress. Any Jew who's connected to their Jewishness and connected to the Jewish people is feeling those same things. So those are things that are keeping me up at night. If it was just my own problem and something that happened to me, I'd be fine. But I know that there are other Jews who are not fine. And I know that society as a whole is not fine. And because I was raised and born and understood that I must be an advocate and an activist, if I feel that if I'm not as active as possible, I'm dropping the ball. And it is that form of leadership that is really exhausting. It's why I wish there would be more leaders, because I keep finding it, and similar to things that we discussed before we started recording, none of us on this call waited for somebody else to do what we saw needed to happen. We got up and we did it. It wasn't even a second thought. The problem is, most people don't do that. Most people are followers. Most people are not leaders. Jews need to lean into the Jewish identity and recognize that Jewish thought, philosophy, education, religion, and peoplehood teaches us all to be leaders. Our rabbis are no closer to God than we are. Our rabbis are not meant to be smarter than we are. We're supposed to rise up to the level of greatness that we see around us. Jewish identity, by the way, it's not something to perform, it's something to live. And advocacy means standing up for the right to live freely, safely, and authentically. So when Jews defend ourselves, by the way, we're not fighting against anyone. We're fighting for human dignity, for truth, and democratic values, which are Jewish values. That's why we keep needing to declare that anti-Semitism is not a Jewish problem. It's a societal problem. When Jews are targeted, it signals a deeper sickness in the society that tolerates it. That's what we're fighting against. That's what we're fighting forward to change. And that's what keeps me up at night.
No, but I just want to solidify that. I think that's right. I think that rather than Jews finding salvation, let's say, in a political party, in a politician, I think we need to develop our infrastructure on our own. And I think if something needs to happen in the ecosystem, if you don't build it, you're passing that on to the next generation of Jews. And that really is our North Star at CJA. If we could put energy into something today that is less of a burden on the next generation of Jews, we will do that, even if it could be detrimental to our brand, to us. We believe in transparency, honesty, and maybe we have that luxury because we're all volunteers. This is what we do altruistically after work. So, you know, I just think that's really important, because I think at the end of the day, I think, you know, a lot of people did run to the right as Jews, but I think America first will become Jew last when it's convenient. And that also might be sobering, you know? So I just think, you know.
Well, it's already happening right now. We're already seeing not only the rise of anti-Jewish bigotry, racism, and hatred from within the left, the progressive movements, the liberal, and even the Democratic Party, but we're seeing it rising more and more again from the right, and even from the Republican Party and from the conservative movements. So it's what forced me to be politically homeless. I've been a lifelong progressive, liberal, Democrat, LGBTQIA2S+ advocate and activist. I'm no longer progressive. I'm no longer a Democrat. I still have many liberal values. I'm no longer an LGBTQIA2S+ activist. I'm an LGBT activist. The LGBT movement became co-opted by the progressive movement, and for years has been shunning conservative LGBT people, religious LGBT people, anybody who didn't follow the queer movement. The Q became something insane. It used to be Q for questioning, and then became Q for queer, and then the plus just meant we're going to keep adding people into this movement. So all of the things that I saw that were against the values of the movements and parties that I was part of made me feel politically homeless. My values never changed. Those movements changed. And that's what got me to eventually become a Republican and to eventually say, gosh, am I a moderate centrist or conservative? And I still don't know. I'm somewhere in the moderate centrist side of things. I'm sometimes left-leaning about certain things. I'm sometimes right-leaning about things. And what I fear is what we're seeing is going to also force me and people like me to be politically homeless again, to say, well, wait a second. If the conservative movements are allowing for blatant anti-Semitism to be shared so openly and to be so normalized, then do we have a place within that? And all it means is no matter where a Jew finds herself or himself, we must be louder, we must be more vocal, we must be more active, and we need to fight for our identity, for our presence, and our ability to exist, not just within those parties and movements and organizations, but to exist. That is the lot in life that the Jews were forced to have.
The parties change, you know? So like if you're standing for liberalism and you're a liberal, and then the Democrats don't stand for liberalism anymore, you know, like for example, women's or, you know, LGBTQ in Palestine, for example, you know.
I'm sorry, LGBTQ in where?
LGBTQ, yeah, in Israel, wherever.
No,
you know,
no. That's an important
in
thing.
Gaza,
in
right, Gaza,
very important.
in Gaza.
Yeah.
Meaning the point is I still feel like we are championing liberalism. If you find your core values, they could rearrange the furniture, but your steel beams are in place. So I really think as an individual, it's a self-actualization moment for politics. You're not reflecting what a politician is telling you and selling you. I think it's really important to define your own values with your family and what's important to you. And then you can match it up, whether it's an R and a D or an I, you know, is in my philosophy.
Correct. I mean, look, defending Jewish people is inseparable from defending democratic values. The two rise and fall together. Right now, we're seeing both fall together. We're seeing failures within the West. We're seeing an Islamization of the world. And we're seeing failures within the Jewish people, including the legacy Jewish organizations, whose failures might not have been as obvious until this post-October 7th world. So that means that the legacy Jewish organizations, especially in the United States, need to do better because they represent us, need to collaborate more and work together in partnership to be the movement of the Jewish people. But it's not just the onus isn't just on these Jewish organizations. The onus is on all the Jewish people. Every Jew, whether they donate, support, are part of a Jewish organization or not, need to take action. This is not about abstract political concepts, just as Israel is not an abstract political concept, nor is Zionism an abstract political concept. It's about the survival and the existence and the future of the Jewish people, of our homeland, of maintaining the center of our people and our culture. We have created this understanding of democracy and understanding of liberalism, where I cannot only be for myself, I must also be for others. I cannot only help myself, I must also help my neighbor, whether my neighbor is Jewish or not. Those are all integral to the Jewish people and have been throughout our history. So this is something we're fighting for. But right now, we need to remember that we cannot allow extremists, whether religious, political, or ideological, to hijack the narrative about Jews or Israel. We need to counter lies with facts, with clarity and courage. Jewish values teach us to protect life, to embrace justice, and to repair the world. Activism is how we turn those values into action.
You talked a little bit earlier about the need for Jewish day schools and a Jewish education. And what I am seeing, at least here, is, again, most Jews historically have aligned with the left and embraced a lot of progressive ideas. So my oldest went to a Jewish day school for 6th grade, and I almost had to pull him out of sex ed, which was actually being taught by another, I think, Federation-funded Jewish organization. Because when we reviewed the materials, I thought it was so far from, teaching basic sex ed. So what I'm trying to get at is I feel like these more left-leaning progressive ideas that have kind of unfortunately made some of us feel pushed out of the parties are being infiltrated in the Jewish day schools from what I've seen. Have you had an experience with seeing any of that?
Firstly, you mentioned that historically Jews have been within the liberal and progressive movements, such as, for example, something that I've been pointing out for many years is when people say that Jews historically have been Democrat in the United States. We need to understand what that history actually is. Jews historically were not Democrat in the United States. It was only until the very late 1930s and early 1940s when the Democratic Party recognized that it needed to be stronger and it courted the unions. And Jews very much were unionized because Jews, especially in the working class, didn't have the same rights that other people did. So they formed their own unions or joined other unions. So the Democratic Party, when it courted the unions to become stronger than the Republican Party in the United States, that's how it absorbed all of these Jews, even though the Democratic Party was the party of the KKK, was the party that supported segregation, was the party that supported slavery and wanted to maintain slavery, and was the party that proliferated racism from a Christianocentric perspective. So we need to recognize that. Jews being part of liberal and progressive movements and different social justice movements, that is what is historical. Social justice movements of all different types, where Jews understood, especially Jews who were raised with Jewish identity, understood that it was their part to do something to make the world a better place. That's how Jews find themselves within these movements that try to seek change, that try to better the world. The problem that we've been seeing in today's world, in our lives now, is that these progressive movements that claimed to want to better lives for everybody were lying. Didn't want to better lives for everybody, only wanted to better lives for specific groups. And they would euthanize victims. Who is the biggest victim and who's a lesser victim and who's the next victim? Well, let's only help specific victims, specific marginalized minorities, and then everybody else should wait in line. That's not how life works. When there are multiple victims and multiple people who are being targeted, I cannot tell a woman who's being raped, oh, you know what, keep being raped over there because right now I'm helping a blind person cross the street. No, we need to help both at the same time. And these progressive movements took a very wrong direction, and that's because they were infiltrated by very nefarious funders, which has been going on clearly since the 1960s. And that is what's happening to us. When we see these progressive movements infiltrating the Jewish schools and Jewish synagogues and the Reform and Reconstructionist movements that I very much have been part of for most of my life, that's something that we need to call out. We need to say, well, what are our Jewish values? It's not about saying Jews first, like the America First people. It's about saying and Jews or Jews and all of these other things. Going back to the concept of Jewish education is paramount. And I actually implore many Jews who donate to all kinds of organizations. We need to donate to Jewish schools. We need to make sure that Jewish schools are not as expensive as they are, because private schools and private Jewish day schools across the United States usually cost anywhere from $30,000 to $50,000 per year per student. You know what? Most families cannot afford that. And most middle-class families who have more than one kid cannot afford that. Our Jewish education needs to be much more affordable, needs to be better funded so people can attend these schools. Because right now what we're seeing across the educational system from K through 12, including the universities, is anti-Jewish narratives affecting all kinds of departments and all kinds of educational systems and all kinds of departments of education. We need to make sure that Jews know who they are, what we are, where we come from, and how we're going to move forward into the future.
Yeah, so we are in this nonprofit space and in this ecosystem, and I would say probably 70% is us dealing with indoctrinated teachers that indoctrinate and don't educate. And I think that's like ground zero for a lot of we go to a lot of board meetings, we show up. Actually, something I'd like to run by you, what we're kind of incubating here is, as an advocacy organization, we've been putting out the symptoms of anti-Semitism. Something happens and then we go there. And I see these federal and these state agencies like AIPAC that raise money for putting Jews and allies into positions of power, but I don't see anything on a grassroots level like that. And I think that's something in these little homogeneous pockets around the country where Jews are mobilizing. I think the first step would maybe be put out the symptoms. But I really would like to see a movement of Western values be inserted. It's funny you talk about unions. In Chicago, we have the CTU, the Chicago Teachers Union. Man, Jews should have stayed in the unions then, because this union kind of is the one that dispenses this literature about indoctrination. I mean, it's ubiquitous. It is in all of our public education. So and really my question would be, instead of mobilizing just for advocacy, is it time to start moving in that direction now, getting our Jewish parents onto these boards of educations? Because we can't just isolate either. We have to make sure that the narratives are true for everyone, no?
Can you rephrase your question?
Yeah. So my question is, what we're thinking about incubating here at the Chicago Jewish Alliance is, rather than putting out symptoms of anti-Semitism, that we would like to incubate something where we can start putting Jews and our allies into positions of power. Have you seen that across the country? And do you think that might be a solution for some of this indoctrination that we're seeing in these schools.
Yeah, I think that's what organizations like APAC, AJC, and JCRCs are trying to do, but they're also failing. They're not doing as well as I wish they would, and as I wish they could.
Well, APEC is only federal. I'm talking about on a grassroots level, like in these smaller municipalities where our children are being taught lessons based on
So I hear what you're saying.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. That is something that we need. We need on a community level and in community organizations and in different boards, community boards, we need to make sure that we do have Jewish representation there. But one of the challenges that I have faced myself when I was told that I wouldn't have board positions because I'm not diverse enough or because there's already too much Jewish representation. So I personally have been told that by LGBT and progressive boards and different community organizations. So that's something that we're facing. So what it means is we need to get these philanthropists and these major donors to not just fund the federal campaigns and the national campaigns, but help fund these different community movements. We need community members to rally amongst themselves to do what their community needs. Nobody's going to know exactly what a specific community needs more than that specific community. So if a neighborhood within Chicago or Chicago suburbs is going through something challenging, it's that community that needs to rise up the way Jews have done in the past. Communities helped themselves the way other movements have built in the past. The Jewish movement needs to emulate the women's movement, the LGBT movement, the Black Lives Matter movement, all of these other movements that we helped support that were not about one person. It was not about ego. It was about peoplehood. It was about movement building 101. Jews need to take the lessons that we have shared and helped create for all of these other socio-political movements and use it for ourselves. And it starts at the grassroots level. It starts at the community level.
Is it possible? But I guess it would be, you can't have your cake and eat it too. Like my real question, I guess, is if we all Jews start going to Jewish schools, do we seed that ground in the marketplace for that, that room to just be filled with their narrative? So my question is, I guess, more so is zeroing in on and I'm not saying you have the solution here, but if this indoctrination is happening, shielding our children is important and giving them the right information is definitely important about their own identity. But I also fear leaving that ecosystem of the public education arena or where the masses are being learned and seeding that ground and starting, our own communities. That's kind of what I'm getting at.
I hear what you're saying. We need to be part of we need to make sure that the educational system correctly represents us. And we need to be very active in that. Even though I still think that Jews need to go to Jewish day schools to really have that solid understanding of their Jewishness, we still need to make sure that people understand who we are, understand our history, understand our peoplehood, understand our religion, and understand our lives today and our desires for the future. We need to make sure that we are properly represented. Right now, we're not properly represented within educational departments, from a K through 12 level. We're seeing so many teachers unions, including one that's headed by Randy Weingarten, who I also know personally, who has allowed the teachers union to do things that are horrendously against Israel, against Zionism, and against the Jewish people, even though she's Jewish. We're facing a massive issue. So I'm saying yes and yes. We should be able to exist and be represented within the grander ecosystem, but we also face a massive problem where too many Jews outside of Israel do not know anything about their Jewishness. All they know are the jokes or Hanukkah, or, they think that Hanukkah is one of the biggest Jewish holidays. Hanukkah is not even a holiday. It's a festival. The fact that most Jews don't know that represents the fact that we need more Jewish education. And I think education for Jews will empower Jews into the future.
Do you remember how much I grappled with that when I was making the decision to pull my son out of public school, and that I was removing me as an active parent in public school as well? But I want to say, and I'm blanking on this because, I've had like 3 hours of sleep. There is, within public schools, it's not a board, but it's positions that you run for and you can have a seat at, and they make decisions on curriculum, for approving curriculum for the school, approving principal pay, approving things. And it's not the school board, right? Like CPS has district-wide school boards, and that's a different thing. But this is specific per school, and they always have seats for community members. So you don't necessarily have to have a child in that school to apply and run for a seat. They have like 2 or 3 seats open for somebody who lives within the community to take that seat. So that's always a great option.
I want to give an example about something that we did at CJA that speaks to this. So this is why we have to be vigilant. There is, in Illinois, you have to teach the Holocaust. It's part of our, I believe it's in law that the governor signed in, our last governor. One of the incidents that we've dealt with, and we actually were able to remove a tenured teacher from the classroom because of this. The students had to learn about the Holocaust, so they had the book Night as part of the curriculum that maybe one of these community members said, yeah, that's a great idea. The teacher had the students juxtapose the book Night with the Palestinian plight. And so that's an example of, unless you're vigilant, unless you're a Jewish person in that classroom, I mean, most people aren't losing sleep like us every night thinking about this. Most people, this is a Jewish issue for a lot of us. We don't realize how naive people can be.
Can I add something to that? She didn't actually even have them read the book.
Right.
She gave them chosen excerpts from the book to use to compare and contrast to other genocides, and had a list and things on that list.
So basically, the short form of describing what that is, she was all lives mattering Jews.
Yeah, I mean, it was a list of events that most on the list were not historically or scholarly classified as having been a genocide, but this downwatering just like of the Holocaust experience as a unique experience is something we're constantly fighting with in these schools. I don't know.
Yeah, well, I mean, no, I think this speaks to all of it. Is it is a balancing act to be vigilant, but you have a fiduciary duty to your child to make sure they get the best education. But we do need to be vigilant on a community level and engaged, because it's that balancing act that I think you're speaking about.
I wanted to go back to an article you actually wrote in August of 23 about progressive liberal Jewish discourse about Israel. How do you feel now about this topic, having lived through what we've lived through these past 2 years?
How do I feel about the progressive liberal discourse about Israel? We've failed. We have failed to have proper Jewish representation and proper representation of Israel within the progressive and liberal movements. And the progressive movements have failed the Jewish people, but also failed themselves, where they stepped away from their own progressive values to exclude Jews or focus on a binary form of thinking, even though they tend to proliferate non-binary lifestyle, but have absorbed a binary form of thinking, as Daniel pointed out, the oppressor versus oppressed. Well, not everything is black and white. Not everything is one thing or another. There's a gray area. Most of the world is a gray area, and you cannot easily define things with this binary oppressor versus oppressed narrative. We have lost the narrative within the progressive movement. The failure lies on Jewish organizations, Jewish leaders in the United States, and the state of Israel. even though I'm a consultant and work directly with many politicians in Israel, we need the Israeli government to do a better job with PR. The problem is the government of Israel faces so much bureaucracy that things get caught up in red tape, and they're not properly representing Israel, the IDF, Zionism, or Jews internationally the way that they should. And that is going to haunt the Jewish people for generations to come. We have lost the Jewish narrative within the progressive movement. The progressive movement is quickly becoming not just anti-Zionist or not, I'm sorry, let me rephrase that. The progressive movement is having an increasingly more anti-Jewish and anti-Zionist perspective, which is now not just saying, let's have these positions. They're now saying, do not engage. When you encounter a Zionist or when you encounter an Israeli, do not engage. That's a problem. We are being pushed out of these movements, especially the movements and the organizations that we as Jews helped create. So it's gotten worse since I wrote that article. It's going to get worse. And I am very short-term pessimistic, but I'm long-term optimistic.
What is one thing somebody listening can do right now to help improve this situation?
Every Jew needs to be more educated. Every ally of the Jewish people needs to be more educated. People need to go to Israel to see what Israel is for themselves, for the people who've never been there, who just assume things because they've focused or received information from TikTok or Instagram. They need to recognize that we are in an information age. And just because there's a lot of information out there, it doesn't mean that all the information is true and factual. People need to understand who is a vetted and educated and safe person to learn from and who is not. If somebody just has millions of followers on social media, it doesn't mean that they're an expert. We need to put our, big girl and big boy pants back on and remember, that life is very challenging. And when people are expressing hardship and pain and fighting against oppressive forces, well, listen to everybody and learn about what's happening. Something like 96% of people under the age of 45 receive their news and world information from TikTok and Instagram. That's a problem. The algorithms are working against us. So what we need is a Jewish algorithm. Every Jew who supports the Jewish people and every ally who supports the Jewish people or who supports their own values needs to follow each other, needs to like and share and engage, because we're dealing with these massive algorithms that are against us. There are 2.4 billion Christians in the world. There are 2.2 billion Muslims in the world. There are 1.4 billion Hindus in the world. There are 585 million Buddhists in the world. There are only 15.5 million Jews in the world. The numbers are against us. And if more Jews and allies do not rise up, we are going to lose this. Anti-Semitism is not just a Jewish problem, it's a world problem. When we're seeing people targeting Jews anywhere they are in the world with justification because people are against Israel or against Zionism, so they're going to target any random Jew anywhere in the world, that is wrong. Would that be allowed if people would start targeting Chinese people because they don't like the Chinese government? Or would they attack Iranian people who live, or Persian people who live around the world because they don't like the Islamic Republic of Iran? That's not happening. Why are they allowing this to happen against Jews? Jewish identity is not controversial. Anti-Semitism is. Diversity without Jews isn't diversity. Curriculum needs to reflect reality, not prejudice. We can't fight hate if we can't name it. And we are naming it as a Jewish people. We're calling it out and we're fighting against the hate. So we need more help from the silent Jews and from our allies.
How do we get people who are now of the mindset that you do not even engage with an Israeli or a Zionist to come and engage?
Sadly, I fear that those people are lost, and we need to focus on not just our allies and friends, but our future friends. We need to amplify the silent majority who just doesn't want to get mixed up in all of this chorus and all of the chaos and anger. They're seeing people being so emotional and they'd rather step back and not be involved. But we have to get them involved, and we have to prove that their involvement isn't just about helping Jews, but it's about helping themselves.
What are you working on in this space right now, and where can our listeners find your work and read as a vetted news source, as someone in the crevices of these battles? Where can we find your work and videos?
Firstly, you can see me all across social media. There aren't that many Yuval Davids out there, so on almost every platform, it's YUVALDAVID. Although on Instagram, I'm Yuval_David_, because apparently the other Yuval Davids took the handle first. So definitely they can find me all across social media. I'm also a news commentator. I'm on the news regularly every week on multiple different mainstream and sometimes not so mainstream news outlets in the US, in Israel, and internationally. I publish my articles in mainstream news publications every week. I'm also a writing fellow for the Middle East Forum. I'm part of Voice of the People, which is one of the President Herzog initiatives, where there are 150 Jews from around the world who are tackling all of these issues. I'm part of many different organizations and think tanks that are trying to not just think about the issues and not just find solutions, but very clearly address the problems in order for more people to try to find the solutions. So that's my long answer. You can find me all across social media, and that's probably the easiest way to find my articles and my news appearances and the advocacy that I do with governmental and non-governmental organizations. Look, I used to be, there are three pillars to my career: entertainment, media, and advocacy. It's always been like that. It used to be much more in the entertainment industry. I have had incredible experiences as an actor and as a filmmaker in Hollywood, in television, in film, in Broadway, in theater. But the Jewish advocacy has, and political advocacy has taken up most of my time increasingly over the last few years, because I found that I not only have a platform and that the work that I do keeps amplifying and opening up more doors, but there's also a great need. I really miss the entertainment industry. I would love to be much more active there, but until more Jews and more allies and more people who truly want to defend democracy do not rise up, then I'll continue to have sleepless nights. So help me sleep, become an activist.
I love it.
I think that's a wonderful place to end it. I'm sorry, Danny, go ahead.
No, I see what my grandma meant with optimism, and what you mean, where you're short-term pessimist, long-term optimist, because guys like you exist. And really what you do is you re-energize us. You validate our work. Like, I'm in healthcare. I want to go take care of people in that space. And that's what I'm used to. And that space never asked me to be different, never asked me to do anything. And I keep thinking of that line where the man doesn't choose the times, but the times choose the man. And thank God we have chosen you. Thank you so much for being on our podcast today, and keep up the good fight. We really appreciate it.
I appreciate you, and keep up the fight as well.
It's been such a pleasure.
Toda Oba. Thank you.
That's it for today's powerful conversation on Jew and Stew. We just spent time with Yuval David, an Emmy Award-winning journalist, actor, and filmmaker who's racked up over 100 international film festival awards. From starring in major network shows like Feud, Madam Secretary, and Days of Our Lives, to appearing as a sharp commentator on Fox, News Nation, I-24 News, and beyond, Yuval brings entertainment, media savvy, and unapologetic truth to every platform he touches. But more than that, he's a tireless advocate for the Jewish people, Israel, American values, LGBT rights, and human dignity. Whether advising NGOs and policy institutes, keynoting at synagogues, universities, and rallies across the US, Canada, and Israel, or being named the #1 top young visionary of the Jerusalem Post and Jewish National Fund USA in 2024, a hero against hate by the ADL, and a World Zionist Congress delegate, Yuval shows us what it looks like to blend creativity with courage. He combats anti-Semitism, building bridges, and inspires us all to step up as activists in our own communities. If this episode fired you up, hit subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcast, or YouTube so you never miss the voices shaping Jewish life right now. Share this with someone who needs to hear this kind of bold, honest talk. Follow us on Instagram and check out the Chicago Jewish Alliance for ways to get involved in advocacy, education, and safety. Thanks to Yuval for joining us and bringing the clarity we all need in these times. Until next time, stay strong, stay proud, keep showing up for the Jewish people in Israel. This is Jew and Stew. We'll see you on the front lines.
Follow the Chicago Jewish Alliance to stay in the loop and subscribe to this podcast so you can see what's coming next. We're going to have speakers that represent the entire spectrum of the Jewish community, from philosophical thinkers, from soldiers, people on the front lines of advocacy work on universities. Thank you for being here. We'll see you next time.